The Peter Pan Picture Book, Chapter 7, Home Sweet Home. But at home in the Darling household, all this time there was deep sorrow. Mr. Darling, as a punishment to himself for taking their guardian Nana away, had vowed that he would live in the kennel till his children's return. For months now he had lived in it, and had been carried to business in it every morning, much to the disgust of the prim little housemaid Liza. Mr. Darling had become quite a celebrity, and great ladies, leaders of society, found him so interesting and touching that they all cried out as he passed by, "Oh, do come to dinner at our house. Do come in the kennel." But it happened one evening, when he returned from business, carried as usual in the kennel, he was taken up to the now desolate nursery, where Mrs. Darling spent most of her time mourning for her lost children, while the faithful Nana tried in vain to cheer her up. "George, George, I believe you are beginning to like that kennel," she said reproachfully as he crawled out. He denied the charge, however, and tried to comfort Mrs. Darling, who never for one moment forgot the little empty beds and the silence and cheerlessness of the nursery. Then he left her, and sitting down by the fire, Mrs. Darling was alone with her sad thoughts. Scarcely, however, had she closed her eyes when three little figures flew in at the window and nestled cozily in their beds. Then softly Wendy called to her mother, but when Mrs. Darling looked round she simply couldn't believe that the children were really there. So many times before she had dreamt of their return that it was not till they all three crowded round her that she realized that they had indeed come home. Oh, what joy to feel once more those dear faces, cool and fresh from the flight through the night air, pressed against hers, hot with tears, to hear once more the sound of those sweet voices, as they all talked at once. At last, when she was a little calm, Wendy began telling her about Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, who with Peter Pan himself were all waiting outside. Directly Mrs. Darling saw them and heard that they had no mothers, she instantly adopted them all. Though the house would be rather crowded, she could easily put up extra beds in the drawing-room, she said, and with a screen on her at-home days, all could be comfortably managed. The only difficulty lay with Peter. Much as at first sight he loved Mrs. Darling, much as he loved Wendy, he couldn't consent to grow up. He wanted to be a little boy always, to play with the birds and the fairies, and to have adventures, which a grown-up man can never, never have. So at last it was arranged that he should fly back alone to the Never Never Neverland, and that once a year Mrs. Darling would allow Wendy to go and stay with him for a whole week to do his spring cleaning.